Rough.
Thank you.
You might remember me. I'm Todd Bowman's son. And good. How are you?
Good.
I'm with KCCI.
Yeah.
Crazy day up here.
Terrible. Pathetic. You know what's going on.
Yeah.
Double can't even debate it. Can't vote no on amendments. If your dad was here, he'd just be super frustrated. I don't know.
Thank you, everyone, for being here today, for being flexible on the timing. As we all know, the end of the legislative session can get a little bit chaotic. So thank you all so much for being here, supporters, members of the media. My name is Erin Davison-Rippey. I'm the State Executive Director of Planned Parenthood here in Iowa. And we are here to discuss a couple of elements about the Health and Human Services bill that is currently being debated in the Senate. This morning, the Iowa Senate once again introduced legislation to defund Planned Parenthood sex ed programs that tens of thousands of young Iowans rely on for age-appropriate, medically accurate information about their health. Planned Parenthood is awarded these funds because we deliver strong results and because we are a trusted community partner that smaller organizations turn to for this crucial information and education. We have seen this legislation before. Year after year, anti-abortion politicians introduce this policy to prevent youth from receiving sex education from Planned Parenthood. And so far, it's always been defeated because most Iowans don't support taking sex education and money away from young people. When reasonable Iowa lawmakers are presented with the facts about how these grants work and what is included in the state-approved evidence-based curriculum, they come to understand that interfering with the program just doesn't make sense. When young people receive this comprehensive sex education, they are more likely to have healthy relationships, lower rates of unintended pregnancies, and decreased need for abortion. It's simple. If you want to see fewer abortions, then make sure people have the health care and the information that they need. If you want to see lower rates, and if you want to see lower rates of sexual violence, teach people about what consent looks like in a healthy relationship. As the leading source of reproductive and sexual health education, Planned Parenthood empowers young people to define their own values and to make decisions that are right for them. Some of these young people choose to have sex. And so yes, Planned Parenthood is there to make sure that youth know how to protect themselves from unintended pregnancy and STDs if they choose to be sexually active. We make sure that youth of all sexualities and genders, including transgender Iowans, are included in these conversations because they need to know how to keep themselves healthy as well. Transgender Iowans are part of the Planned Parenthood family and, like everyone, have a fundamental need for quality health care and sex education, and they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. We know that when people are truly cared for, they make their lives, their families, and their communities better and healthier. The unfortunate reality is that transgender Iowans face additional unique challenges, and when it comes to getting the care that they need, healthcare environments can be unwelcoming to transgender patients. From forms to fill out, to the language used in waiting rooms, to the lack of understanding, and to unconstitutional and unfair attacks like this legislation that seeks to deny coverage of necessary medical care. It is shameful that elected officials would put their own personal agenda above the well-being of their constituents. Denying any Iowan health care or information about their own body is denying them their human rights.
Yes.
It is time for legislators to stop playing political games. Planned Parenthood will not rest in our mission to ensure that all Iowans can access high-quality, affordable care and accurate, non-judgmental education to be healthy now and into the future.
Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Hoffmans and I'm the Executive Director of One Iowa Action. We are a statewide LGBTQ advocacy organization working to preserve and advance equality for LGBTQ Iowans. Transgender individuals are important parts to our community. They are our neighbors, our teachers, our family, our friends, and they deserve the same dignity and respect as any other person. Unfortunately, more people have claimed to have seen a ghost than know a transgender person, which is a really unfortunate fact, but that's really where this legislation stems from. If our legislators would only get to know our transgender community members and look them in the eyes and tell them what they're doing specifically in this legislation, I think we would have a different story. So I would urge our legislators in the future to slow down legislation, engage with our community, and allow for voices to be heard, and the most vulnerable voices to be heard specifically in this case. Access to these medically necessary services are essentially life or death for our transgender Iowans. The Iowa Civil Rights Act has protected all Iowans from discrimination based on gender identity since 2007.
Yes.
The Iowa Supreme Court unanimously ruled that this ban violates the act by using a patient's gender identity to determine whether or not a medically necessary treatment will be covered. This amendment is a harmful attempt to deny transgender Iowans medically necessary care that will be and will not stand up to legal muster. Our non-discrimination law is working well. Legislators should focus their efforts elsewhere.
Yes.
This ban inaccurately calls gender-affirming surgery merely cosmetic, and we know that that is just inaccurate. We have seen firsthand how powerful, life-changing, and necessary these services can be through our work with transgender Iowans. Most major medical associations assert that this surgery is medically necessary for many transgender individuals, including the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, American Academy of Family Physicians, the National Association of Social Workers, and the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Medical professionals have a process to determine whether or not gender-affirming surgery is medically necessary, and this ban does not respect that process. Medicaid was created to make sure that the low-income people, the most vulnerable, are able to access necessary medical care. This ban prevents Medicaid in Iowa from fulfilling that purpose for so many transgender Iowans. This amendment also flies in the face of Iowa's legacy of equality and fairness. We should be very proud of our equality and fairness legacy, but this goes against that. It will dissuade many others from coming here. We are trying to recruit the best talent to come live and work, and we are in a very large shortage of workforce in the state of Iowa. So this will only prevent other LGBTQ folks from coming to live here. The amendment uses inaccurate and very offensive terms to describe transgender Iowans. It's clear that whoever drafted this does not understand the transgender community and should not be writing a healthcare policy to begin with, because this impacts people's lives. I am a social capital tri-chair, which is part of the Capital Crossroads of Iowa, which is essentially the strategic plan for Central Iowa. And one of the things we created this past year was a For Equity tool for leaders specifically in our community to use whenever they're making important decisions that impact the lives of our constituents. And the first step that we encourage leaders to use is to authentically engage a community that's going to be impacted. I would urge our legislators to sit down and talk. You will hear firsthand from some transgender Iowans today, but look in the eyes of the transgender Iowans and tell them specifically how you are harming them, because you are going to potentially cause a lot of harm for our transgender Iowans. This really boils down to singling out a group of people based on their identity and not allowing them to access a service that any other person can access. This is discrimination, and it will lead to so many lawsuits on the taxpayers' dime in the future. Thank you so much for coming today.
I'm Connie Ryan. I'm the Executive Director of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa. Interfaith Alliance of Iowa, Action Fund, and Progressive Iowans from across the state believe that it is imperative that access to age-appropriate, medically accurate sex education is available to all youth and all Iowans. Ensuring access to accurate sex education should not be a partisan issue. If we are serious about reducing unintended pregnancies, why would we reduce access to sex education? As a state, we should be expanding access in order to ensure that our youth and young adults have the best information to make positive, responsible, informed decisions and to have the tools to better handle difficult situations if they arise. The language in the amendment to House File 766 is clearly an attempt to insert a particular extreme religious agenda into public policy. It places Iowans, our youth, our young adults in harm's way by blocking sex education funding from one of Iowa's leading providers that serves communities across our state. The language is short-sighted. It is vengeful. It is playing political games with the future of many of Iowa's youth. Interfaith Alliance of Iowa stands with Planned Parenthood. I want to briefly address the issue of access to medical care for people who are transgender. Placement of this language in the Iowa Civil Rights Act is no coincidence and is egregious simply for that reason alone. People who are transgender are one of the most marginalized communities in our nation and in our state. There is a reason they are provided protection in our Iowa Civil Rights Act. The language in this amendment is wrong, it is harmful to real Iowans, it is shameful. We strongly urge senators to vote no on the amendment. Thank you.
My name is Mark Stringer. I'm the Executive Director of the ACLU of Iowa. The Costello Amendment to the Health and Human Services Budget Bill is dangerous and it is harmful. It risks people's health and lives to score political points. Banning Medicaid coverage for gender-affirming surgery would bring significant harm to people who rely on Medicaid and who desperately need this surgery. This is a matter of life and death for some of our Iowa neighbors. This cruel amendment has no basis in medicine or science. Every major medical association agrees that gender dysphoria is a serious medical condition and that surgical treatment is medically necessary for some transgender people. This amendment is a clear violation of equal protection under the Iowa Constitution because it would discriminate against people simply because they are transgender. The part of the amendment that blocks sex education funding from going to Planned Parenthood is also outrageous. Planned Parenthood is a leading source of science-based, unbiased, non-judgmental information about healthy relationships, birth control, sexually transmitted diseases, and other crucial topics. Cutting this funding would be extremely detrimental for our state and its citizens, and would likely reduce the progress that has been made in reducing the teenage pregnancy rate, among other positive gains in sex education. We urge legislators to reject the Costello Amendment.
Good afternoon. My name is David Sikelka, and I am a senior minister at Urbandale United Church of Christ. My congregation is welcoming and affirming of the LGBT community and has been for over 25 years. We have transgender people in our congregation and provide space for a transgender support group. This amendment, as it now stands, inflicts needless suffering and real hardship on the trans community. The people who experience gender dysphoria lead extremely difficult lives that most of us cannot comprehend. The stress and anxiety caused by having to live as a gender that does not reflect one's identity takes a toll day in and day out. These medical services that are being banned are essential to establish an identity that is healthy and authentic. It is no different than treating other sources of pain or discomfort, or than treatments that reestablish sexual attributes after accidents or surgery. Our bodies are not just machines. They are expressions of who we are and how we live. Now, I believe that some of those proposing this amendment may come to their position on this issue because of religious beliefs, and I want to address those as a member of the clergy in a Christian denomination. Jesus was often accused of violating the religious sensibilities and laws of his time, and one recurring point of contention was that he healed on the Sabbath when work was forbidden. In response, he used the example of someone who owned an animal like an ox or a donkey, who, discovering that the beast had fallen into a pit on the Sabbath, would most assuredly rescue that animal. And how much more important would it be if the one in need of rescuing is a human being? Every faith tradition has parables and lessons on the importance of showing compassion. But this amendment is the opposite of compassion. It assumes that some people's pain is not important, that some people's happiness is not worth pursuing, that some people's healing can be postponed indefinitely, that some people can be left in the pit of misery. There is nothing of the teaching of Jesus in this amendment. Moreover, we must reject efforts to legislate around the Iowa Supreme Court, which has ruled that discriminating against transgender people is a violation of the Civil Rights Act. We cannot allow that act to be ignored, or all of us are at risk of being marginalized. Those of us who are in the minority, in our thoughts, in our beliefs, race, or sexual orientation, are always at risk of being marginalized. And unless we always and everywhere call our systems, in this case the legislature, on their overreach and abuse of power, then we will lose our rights as well. I have been privileged to walk with transgender people in their journeys, whether surgeries were involved or not. And I can testify to the joy and freedom and new life that are experienced when they reach a point of resolution with their own physical attributes. We miss so much of the fullness of life and the wonder of creation when we limit our view to only that with which we are comfortable. I urge all state legislators to take a step back from this disastrous amendment so that we may do what is best for all Iowans. Thank you.